Let us be in prayer, and I've written this prayer with this idea that it's a busy time, but Jesus calls us to take upon ourselves his yoke, which is easy, right? So let us be in prayer. Oh, Jesus, it is said that you came to give abundant life. And you have indeed provided for a faith that enriches life and at times fills our cups to overflowing. And wow, those moments take our breath away. You are also aware that the fullness of life includes the stress-filled areas of tension and needs and even sheer exhaustion. You are aware that life can be more overwhelming than overflowing, more in shadows than in light. In such moments, we wonder if we can even catch our breath. And it is in these moments you invite us to find rest in you, for your yoke is easy and your burden is light. Yet we confess, gentle Jesus, that as ministers and as church leaders, this is difficult to do. Are we not the ones who stand in the gap and bear the burdens of our congregations? Are we not your shepherds responsible for the sheep of your pastors? Oh, Jesus, help us to remember that the still waters and the green pastures are prepared for us as well. Guide us in this time of pressing needs. May we locate and utilize the yoke of your ineffable being so that our being is indeed made lighter. Grant that if in this present stretch of work, as difficult as it is, that we may find ease, relaxation, and even rejuvenation in our own experience of resurrection. Amen and amen. Well, again, I thank you all for joining us today. If you I know you did, you got on here, that's where the link is. As you saw in Lori's email, our conversation today is part of really an extended conversation of the conference from before I arrived and before Andy was in his position as well, because I arrived a couple of months before Andy, around bylaw changes, both to the foundation and to the conference sets of bylaws around how the trustees, my assumption is soon to be board of directors for the foundation, is picked. And there's been a lot of stuff said, and since I wasn't here to know how it was originally said, I could simply say a lot of it misses the mark, but why or how, that I cannot speak to. So our goal today is help to set that mark clear and straight. Some people have talked about the foundation separating from the conference. It can't do that. The conference is why it exists, and it can't exist outside the conference, right? The conference created it. Its whole purpose is the support of the conference, so it doesn't go off and support other things. So there's no separation in this. It's just a way that the foundation is a little bit more objective with who's looking at the handling of the accounts, and gives a space for the foundation to say to the conference budget in particular, we're not sure that this is the appropriate use of the funds. So that's what this is about. Andy's going to give a little more background to get with that. And I think, Andy, are you also going to cover how we're now choosing our trustees as well? Thank you, because you articulate that way better than I do. So Andy's going to give that. Nan is here. She's going to also talk about some of the the impact of how we've been doing things, because I think that's important for us to understand. And then I'll come back at the end with a couple of scenarios around things. So Andy, thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. And thanks all for joining in. Just to give you a little bit of background, back in October of 2018, the membership of the foundation amended the foundation's bylaws to do the things that we're going to talk about today. The original effective date for that was July 1 of 2019, but because of impending retirements, new staff, the desire to drill down and ascertain sort of administrative issues, and to get more comfortable with the changes, the effective date was deferred to July 1, 2022, which is now almost upon us. So in the interim, we've done a lot of work looking at the issues and thinking about how the foundation supports the conference, etc. The changes themselves, I mean, there's a bunch of changes that are more money in nature, really to conform to our Nonprofit Corporations Act, and to do some simplification of our governance structure. But the primary reason for the changes was to impose a structure that is slightly more independent from the governance of the conference. There's a desire to protect and preserve the resources that we hold for the conference, and improve our asset management functions, and protect that a bit from the spending functions, the program and mission functions of the conference. And in fact, that was the original intent of creating the foundation in the first place, is to apply some fiscal discipline to our holdings, as well as to make the foundation more attractive to donors and folks, you know, who want us to steward funds for them. Right now, the bulk of the membership of the foundation and the directors are appointed directly by the conference. So the big change in our bylaws is that now, going forward, a bare majority out of 11 directors, 6 directors will be appointed by the foundation board, and 5 would be elected from the conference. Those 5 that are elected from the conference, of course, would participate in the decision to appoint the 6 who are appointed by the board. This gives a structure, this gives some slight structural independence to the foundation, which is really necessary from a fiduciary and trust standpoint. The foundation does act as a formal trustee over certain funds. Certain specific trusts have been created, and the foundation serves as a trustee. And in particular, the best example of that is the Cone Trust, which was created in 1878. But over the years, there's been concerns. That's an arrangement that we have Attorney General oversight on, and there have been concerns that essentially the beneficiary controls the trustee, and that's not a tenable concern. I mean, that's not a tenable arrangement going forward. There has to be just enough structural independence that the trustee can make a hard decision to say, this is all we can afford to allot for spending this year, and make the hard decision about reinvestment of assets without the pressure of funding immediate program concerns. Over the recent history, going back 10, 15 years or so, there's been a lot of pressure on the foundation to fund immediate mission concerns of the conference. Nan will talk a little bit about that, but it has resulted in a draw against our unrestricted funds that is not sustainable in the long run. that would ultimately exhaust those funds. So that was really part of the drive to make sure that we have some structural independence, and that so that we can steward our assets in perpetuity for the conference. There is a very, there's sort of a negative narrative out there that we are separating. And as David said, we are not separating. I mean, the foundation exists to support the conference. The monies that the foundation holds are used for the conference. We continue to have fiduciary duties and obligations, all the, the duty of good faith, the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, all of those run towards the mission of the foundation, which is to support the conference. So none of that changes. But we are able in our bylaws changes, particularly in the way in which directors are appointed, to achieve enough of a structural difference in independence that it would satisfy scrutiny from donors, from the Attorney General, from other parties who want to be sure that when you have to, sometimes you have to say no. You can make the hard decision. You can make that hard decision. So that the biggest change and most significant change in the foundation's bylaws are around that the appointment of directors. And the other change of substance is that that we will no longer have the membership layer. It doesn't change the fiduciary duties of the board, which all remain the same, but it aligns us with typical nonprofit structure of similarly situated organizations, and administratively makes things a little smoother. So what we're going into now, because those changes have been passed and go automatically into effect in July, is that the conference needs to appoint, adopt a structure for the appointment of its directors. So from the conference side, there are 5 directors on the foundation board. One of them is the council chair, so that person would serve by virtue of position. And 4 others are elected. So the primary change in the conference bylaws amendments that are up for vote at this upcoming AHA is the manner in which those 4 directors are elected. And I believe the proposal is that 4 of them would be elected, 2 of them would be elected by the AHA, and 2 of them would be elected by the council directly. So there are some other changes being proposed, but those are more of a ministerial cleanup type things. And I guess David and Lori could talk about those later, but really the substantive change deals with that election. There's also a section in the conference bylaws that just parrots, that just quotes the foundation bylaws. And because there's been some changes to the foundation bylaws, there's been a tightening of the statement of purpose, and of course the manner in which directors are elected. The conference bylaws need to be changed to make the 2 consistent. So that's what's really before us. But maybe, Nan, this is a good time you can talk a little bit about some of the financial pressures historically that the foundation has been under related to its budget and the draw upon funds.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. See a lot of familiar faces now. So if you guys are first Wednesday, regular participants, you'll remember maybe a couple months ago, I think it was the February 1st Wednesday, that I had a talk about fiscal sustainability. And in that presentation, I had a graphic, if you'll remember, showing that we were spending more than we were earning. So when I guess Lori's blurb about this week's or this month's first Wednesday, she said something like, me mentioning or me providing information on the traditional handling of our funds. So I think that was her nice way of saying how we were small kind overspending. And when I say small kind, that's my local polite way of saying we had a history of overspending. So at least one of the first Wednesday meetings, I talked about a going concern issue that came up in the 2020 audit. So I'm not sure if that's like accounting mumbo jumbo to most of you, but what a going concern is after the audit, the audit firm will issue a report. So we've been getting clean, unmodified reports. But in that report, they can also mention a going concern. Going concerns are not especially great for an organization. Lenders won't want to lend, investors won't want to invest generally, but here donors might not want to donate because they're afraid that we won't be here in the long run. So I want to make it clear though that it didn't hit our report, but it did shine a light on our responsibility to be more financially prudent. And you might be asking, why am I bringing this up again when we're talking about bylaw changes? It's not to lecture, I promise. It's more to give you the history and to reiterate what Andy was just talking about the controlling interest on the foundation board. And you all know that both David and Andy were talking about the notion of us separating. No, we're all here to serve and support the conference, but there needs to be some semblance of independence so that the foundation can fulfill its, fiduciary responsibilities. So that's basically my spiel. Take it away, David.
Thank you, Nan. Before I do, Andy, I don't know if you saw in the chat, there was a question there. Please clarify again, under the new bylaws, who appoints and who elects the foundation trustees? Are they all UCC or from the wider community?
There are a total of 11 directors, plus the conference minister who serves as a director without vote. 5 of those directors come from the conference directly. The proposal is that the council chair will serve, be one of those, and 4 others would be elected to the board. 6 of the directors on the trustee board are nominated and elected by the board itself. So the 11 voting directors would determine who succeeds them, who those 6 would be. And that would be done through the foundation's nominating committee vetting process and then ultimately by a board vote. All the directors right now are UCC members, and there's no reason to expect that they wouldn't continue to be UCC members. Our nominating committee has that as a requirement for consideration. We do, however, permit non-UCC members to serve on committees because we've found over the years that getting some expertise that might be outside of our area is helpful to our understanding and education of ourselves. So, but I think that's basically the process. So what's before the AHA will be the process for the conference to elect its directors to the foundation.
All right, thank you, Andy. I just want to come in with some observations, right? The nice thing about being a new person in town is that you tend to see things that those who live in town don't see because we've gotten used to those type of things. So these are just some observations. And I'm going to outline them around last year, we had the council set down looking at particularly our strategic plan and the pressures upon the conference and sketch out some scenarios around these objectives that we had. And 3 scenarios were sketched out. It was interesting, right? The strategic plans called for mission-based financial stewardship, but the 3 scenarios were all around our endowments and how they're handled. I found that interesting. So the first scenario, and these words are out there and they've been repeated to me, which is fine. That's what they're there to do. Is that this is the dog, the tail wagging the dog. This is the foundation telling the conference what to do. It certainly can be seen that way if you believe the foundation is not part of the conference. If the foundation is a part of the conference, and it's just a part of the conference, right? A part of the family having a conversation with another part of the family. But it could be a concern that the foundation would somehow outgrow the influence of the conference and begin telling the conference what to do. I think at this time, because the conference budget is a budget voted on by the AHA Pa'aina, that there are enough checks and balances in the system that allows for the conference to continue to be in control of its budget. Appropriately in control of its budget. The other scenario, and it's the one that I think really was at play in the life of the conference, was the dog bites off its tail. And in this scenario, we eat away at the foundation till it can't support us anymore. Foundation support is imperative. When we get to the AHA Pa'aina and we look at our streams of income, you will see that our endowments are a much larger stream of income than OCWM is. And so without the foundation, this conference office would be quickly reduced to 2 or 3 people, probably 2, and maybe a half-timer, right? Because the endowments would be gone and we'd be relying upon OCWM, which last year dipped below 200,000 for the calendar year. So please be aware of that. And this is why I also think that was going on. Right now, I do have a vote. I have a voice with vote on the Board of Trustees, but Andy doesn't have a voice with vote on the council. And so I do think there's undue influence because my one vote might be the tipping thing, right? And so that's there. This is the biggest example in my mind of undue influence. There was within the foundation, there was this what's ubiquitously called unrestricted fund number 1. Okay, that's within the foundation and our accounting, but within the conference, that was interestingly called the Conference Minister Discretionary Fund. Now, why would an unrestricted fund be called the Conference Minister's Discretionary Fund unless, of course, there was that habit of dipping into that fund? And I do know that habit was there. That fund was zeroed out in April of 2019. I arrived in September of 2019. And between September and the following June, there have been requests of upwards of $100,000, assuming that fund, we could just dip into that fund and pull it out. And I know that people did not care to hear that fund no longer existed. 1, I was called a liar publicly in a meeting for stating that. And 2, you all get angry when I have to say we don't have the money. And you say, well, where's the money? And that's the tail wagging the dog. That's where the emotional reaction has gone to. When in reality, we were biting our tail off. And so I support this change because I think it gives that little break that allows us that question, are we biting the tail off in these type of things? The other scenario, and the one that Andy and I are committed to, and I think the council and the Board of Trustees are committed to, although I haven't polled them, so I can't say I can speak for them. But that is the third scenario, right? It's enlightenment. The dog and the tail are one, right? And that's what we're putting forward. I think this plan helps us to achieve that. I think the relationship and the transparency that we are seeking around our finances and the uncovering of myths and rumors and just mistakes and understanding is all part of helping us understand how these entities relate to each other, how the foundation supports the conference budget, but why there needs to be some objectivity in that support so that we can, as Andy said, safeguard the assets so that the conference can continue in its current form, and we have reduced it. So current form would have been 2019. In the 2019 form, we would have blown through the endowments in 9 years. So that by 2028, we would have been bankrupt if we continue that type of spending and that type of influence upon the foundation to make them so they could say yes without feeling sad, right, or bad that they had to say no. So that's kind of what's there. That's what's in the air. That's what we've been looking at. We're going to open it up for questions. I'm hoping they're all for Andy because he's more articulate than I am, but we'll take questions. I'll even say that Nan's available for questions. She'll hit me up later because she doesn't like that. But if there's questions, feel free to ask.
I just want to say thank you all for your willingness to speak the truth, as difficult as that might be. And I think that's what we as pastors also need to do with our congregations and our councils. And because of your leadership, and by doing that, I'm following your example that our church also has to look at real numbers, not wishful thinking numbers. And I had this in mind when I spoke with the forensics team and the finance team, that we cannot count on funds like the Maui County Fair unless we actually have them. And this pandemic in the last 2 years, because of the cancellation of the county fair, that's a huge chunk of our budget. And we cannot, the budgets that were being formulated here were on wishful thinking budgets. And so thank you all for the truth speaking, even as much as it might hurt. We need to hear that on our end.
Thank you, Tino. Other thoughts, ideas? Yes, Kealoha, and then Boyd.
I'm not sure if, Nan, when you were saying, you used the term semblance in sharing with us a moment ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, Andy, you know, the thing about semblance of independence, I guess the question in my mind is, what would happen if we didn't make this change? Are there legal implications? I know you said that the Attorney General or donors might be questioning whether or not the foundation can act to safeguard those assets.
I think that
in other words, I'm asking, are we compelled to do this? And if so, why?
I think that with respect to formal trust arrangements we have, we're compelled to do this. Because I think that there is a strong body of law that says the trustee the beneficiary, i.e. the conference, the beneficiary shouldn't be controlling the trustee. That defeats the very purpose of a trust, where you're supposed to have some independence. With respect to non-trust assets, it is less necessary to do this, but I think it is still a good thing to do to instill some fiscal discipline on the conference, and then the big conference, meaning the conference as well as the foundation as a whole.
Got it. Finally. It's like
That's okay. And until you get it, we haven't answered your question. So just keep asking it, right? Boyd, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah.
and stop laughing, Boyd.
You know, when the the thing came out about first separating the two entities. I don't know exactly what I wrote, but I know I wrote a letter from the state council speaking against it, or it wasn't really clear of understanding. But since then, with the transparency of both of you folks explaining more of how this separation will benefit us, I'm glad that we're at this point now that I can support this separation of the two entities for the betterment of the Hawaii Conference and the member churches. But Olaf, I see you on here, but I remember Olaf, I think was back in the early 2000. I wasn't quite involved, but I was attending the state council meetings with Sharon, and we had a discussion at your church. And you did tell me if the conference keep operating the way it is, it's going bankrupt. And this is exactly what with the new controllers that have been looking at the finances and stuff have really come out and shown that we would be bankrupt in a few years if we keep on the process that we were going. So to me, it's all positive that what we're doing now is we're trying to correct and be more responsible for our finances, and it's all good. Thank you.
Thank you, Boyd.
So Boyd, your point was it's my fault? Is that?
I heard you had great
No.
insight ahead of its time. That's what I heard.
Yeah.
We do appreciate that.
And that's what I was, Olaf, I was giving you credit because you mentioned this to me early on. And even at that time, I was still trying to figure out this whole operations in the Hawaii Conference itself, because I was brand new into this denomination and trying to learn the ins and outs, you know, of how, especially the financial side. I wasn't even aware of how delicate this process is with all the endowments and you know, I was always told that the foundation is the one that go out and look for the money, and the conference just does the programs, and they tell a foundation we need X number of dollars. And I guess the foundation is the one that got to find the money somehow, instead of telling the conference, we just ain't got the money. So they start dipping into the corpus, and that's how we end up in the position we are now, that it's good that we're not that far in where we cannot recover ourselves, you know. So hopefully we can all see the big picture and accept what it is and make changes on our side too. But Olaf, I thank you for bringing that up early on, that you saw it happening. Okay.
I kind of have a question, has nothing to do with that. Thank you, Boyd, for, I know, affirming whatever that was. Okay. Andy, you use the language trust a lot, and I think that that's correct. And that might actually help, I think, people to understand the relationship better if, instead of just calling it the foundation all the time, that we call it the trust foundation, or, you know, I think people understand that relationship. You get what I'm saying here?
Yes, very much. And it's a good way to remind us that the foundation has a mission to support the conference, and the directors of the foundation need to, essentially be trustees in stewarding the assets and making sure that there is enough to support the conference. But like a trustee saying, sometimes having to say no, we simply don't have the funds. This is what we can afford to draw this year, et cetera, those types of tough things. But yeah, we actually do hold certain assets in trust. There's a form, Cone Trust is a perfect example. There's a legal trust that exists, it's written. We have, real specific duties that arise from it. We hold other assets, not so much in trust, but still for the benefit of the conference. But I think I do view the role of the conference as to all that we do as a trust relationship with the conference.
Thank you. Pal, yes.
Andy, thank you for answering my question about how people get elected under the proposed changes or the soon to be implemented changes in terms of the Hawaii Conference Foundation bylaws. How does the bylaws change or changes for the two entities? How does that change whether the trustees will have the strength to tell the conference no? If the trustees who were charged with the same thing, fiduciary responsibility, not a normal word in my mouth, and they didn't, they just kept giving money to the conference when the conference asked, how is rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic going to fix this problem?
Well, it's a little more than rearranging the deck chairs here. I mean, the foundation, I mean, first of all, I've got to understand, and all of our board members get training, that when they're sitting in their board seat, that they have a duty to the foundation, and they have to understand those fiduciary duties. One of which is to support the mission of the conference, but part of that is taking care of the asset. So in the present case, a majority of the directors of the foundation are going to be appointed by the foundation board. So if there's a political pressure coming from the conference to do certain things, 6 of the 11 directors are, their appointment doesn't come from the conference side, it comes from the board itself. So they are at least in a position of, the board can say, well, we need to select Olaf because he's a good independent financial thinker and has some physical discipline, and he'll come onto the board and he'll come through that process as opposed to coming from the conference side or through the Ahapa'aina, where you get a lot of political pressures tied up in the decision as to who runs and who to vote for, etc. It is actually structurally a fairly small change because we were not looking to do something. Well, I mean, I wasn't even there at the time, but my understanding was we weren't looking to do something that created an earth-shattering paradigm change to our relationship. We were trying to do it in little steps and do a change that's just enough structurally to be able to satisfy the question of, are you structurally independent? And I think that does achieve it. It does achieve it. So, but we're still a financial ministry of the Hawaii Conference as a whole.
If I can piggyback on that, the idea of looking at a foundation as something like, the term here, Titanic, or the house of straw that the wolf blew down, is very troubling to me because of foundation. And I believe when this foundation was set up that this was the term that they wanted to use because this was what you could build upon. This was the foundation of something bigger and better to come. And yes, I think that over the last few decades, it's become indeed the Titanic, and the word foundation has been lost. So to reclaim that language of this is the base upon which we build, I think would be very helpful.
It's a good thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack, I think you had your hand up.
Yes. I think the other thing you say, not an earth-shaking change. Removing the membership is a change, because there were times when that could sway the trustees. So I think we need to be transparent about that and be very clear what that means, that you're no longer, the foundation no longer has members.
Yeah, I mean, that is correct. But, you know, under trust law and fiduciary obligations, that the board's duties run to the mission of the organization and actually not the members. So it's not a change in the fiduciary role of the trustees themselves. And in practice, it sort of has just added a layer of administration, which has been difficult over time. The trustees and the council are still going to get all the same information, because we have an obligation to do all that reporting anyway. So
there is, I see your hand, Kyle, just a moment. For the background here, the foundation is a membership nonprofit, and the membership is composed of the members of the Board of Trustees for the foundation and the members of the council for the conference. That's the membership as it is now. When the new bylaws are put into place, then the membership will cease to exist. The foundation would no longer be a membership nonprofit. However, we've already talked about at what times those two bodies would probably need to meet together just to touch bases. But thank you, Jack, because you're right. That is a significant change in the structure. It may not be a big change in function, but it is a change in the structure. And there are some thoughts about what that means. So thank you, Jack. Kyle.
Thank you. Andy, I understand the characterization of this being a relatively small change, although these are, you know, real changes, the membership and how people end up on the board. If the board of trustees of the foundation then limits more responsibly, fiscally responsibly, the amount drawn by the conference or given to the conference, while these other things might be characterized as small changes, that sounds like it will cause a momentous change for the conference. If the draw is untenable in terms of its size, Nan has the correct words for that, but untenable, and if OCWM is considerably lower and not going up but going down, lower than the draw, then we're already down, I think, a half full-time equivalent recently in terms of office staff. I, as a chairperson of a association committee on ministry, have already experienced a diminishing support for the institutional functioning, which sounds icky, but is real. Like what comms do is really important to keeping the denomination functioning on a particular level. Sounds like what's coming fairly soon is a much more dramatic decrease in the funds available to the conference, and therefore a dramatic change in how we function as conference. Am I drawing the right conclusions here?
well, I think that's going to happen. That's got to happen no matter what the structure. And I don't think that conclusion necessarily arises from these particular structural changes. What it does do is it adds the voice of the Board of Trustees to the decision of, do we just keep invading principle to fund program, right? So it's going to add a check there. We do have a plan. Yes, there's belt tightening. Yes, it's been hurting. We started that a year and a half ago, and we have a plan to tighten that belt more slowly so that we don't we're not doing it precipitously, because that would just really make life hard for all that we do missionally and for the conference. We're continuing on that. We are tracking each year to do a smaller and smaller draw, but kind of keep support the budget for the conference as best we can out of that draw. We're also looking at reinvesting assets. That's largely what's driving the sale of units at Craigside, where we can get a much better return if those are invested in something else. And with that, hopefully can grow the corpus so we have even less effect ultimately on the budget for the conference. So the administrative implementation of all of this is to try and do this in a way that doesn't quite hurt so much, that's gradual. And hopefully we're successful in that.
Our goal, the plan, right, is that our goal, we were at 8-point-something% draw, and over, instead of the 7 to 9 years to bankruptcy, over 7 to 9 years, step that back so that we would be within the safe draw range of 4.5 to 5%. That goal remains regardless of the structure of the foundation and the conference relationship, because without it, we're still gnawing our tail off. So that's part of that, is that there's a plan in place with that step back of belt tightening. Yes, it's a leaner office, but this office has been getting leaner over the years. When I was interviewed, right, there was another position, which by the time I got here, no longer even existed. And so forth, we could look back over the years, but there are other dynamics involved in that as well. And part of what we have to do is ask the question: what's the ministry of a conference office staff now, and how do we do that ministry faithfully and effectively for our conference? But thank you, Kyle, because you and I both know there's way more conversations involved there, and I do appreciate that as well. Kealoha, did I see you raise your hand, or were you just touching your face?
I kind of did, but I think I answered my own question.
Okay. If you're comfortable with your answer, then that's fine by me too. I just want to give you the chance.
All right. So, Andy, I was thinking, you mentioned the thing about the trust, and Cohen is an example. Is there a marked difference by trying to couple that with endowments, or are we talking about the same thing? Like through the work with Boyd on State Council, we talk about the Weary Fund, the Wong Fund, the Keli'ihō'omalu Fund, and then we have this new one from Ohio, Defender Fur or whatever.
Defender Fur, correct.
Are those considered in that group of trust obligations that we have? That was going to be my question.
Yeah, in terms of how we manage endowment, we have to approach it from a trust beneficiary standpoint. So Cohen, like Cohen, the Defender Fur has been set up for actual real sort of formal administration. The conference will propose a project to spend that money. They will petition the board of the trustees of the foundation. Foundation will award the grant, and then later the conference will report back on the expenditures, and any unspent monies would have to be restored to the endowment. So there is a fiscal discipline which is comparable to a trust arrangement in respect to those endowment funds.
Thank you.
Can I just add something that I've seen happening at the foundation, which has nothing to do with structural changes, but I think will make a huge difference, is that honestly, I believe that there's a new level of integrity that maybe Nan Katsuda, if you want to talk about this a little bit, but as comptroller, recently you stopped me and said, well, no, we need the new signatures for your signature card and all this. And that just warmed my heart, actually. It's just not like, well, yeah, sure, we trust you. We're gonna do this for you kind of stuff. It was like, hey, you know what? There are procedures, there are rules. And that sense of integrity in the structure, like I said, really helped me a lot. So, yeah.
I'm glad. So I don't ever know if I'm going to get more pushback than, and Andy's continually remind me like, hey, we should put in a control for this, or just because you hear about so much fraud in the nonprofits nowadays. So yeah, I'm thinking we're trying to hold ourselves up to a higher line right now. So, but thank you. I appreciate the appreciation instead of any sort of pushback.
Yeah.
And I will say, even with the grant process, especially the coin grant, it is actually harder for the accounting staff, and even Lori, who has to do a lot of the legwork too. So, but I think it's worth it. So you are being more financially responsible, or we are. So thank you.
This is a
Yeah,
good
the goal is to always do things the hard way.
Yeah.
It's a good segue to please, as your church makes requests for funds and that sort of thing, to please be patient if we respond with what seems like a bureaucratic or administrative response. But we're trying to go through a process. And as many of you know, I sit on the board of the insurance board, so I see some really bad scenarios out there. So it's always in the back of my mind that I don't want any of that to happen to us, to our conference.
Are there other questions or thoughts or anything that you would like to express? If not, then we are at the top of our hour. Thank you again for your time today. May your Holy Week journeys find blessed resurrections at the end of them. Thank you all.